findings of the investigation, answer what questions I can for you. I will, at the close of this, we have copies of the majority of the investigative reports, which you can take with you. We also have a copy for each of you of the video, which actually shows the shooting of Mr. Bermudez-Arenas by the officers captured by one of the patrol cars at the time of the incident. Those will be provided to you at the close of the session at the end of my statement. I will be candid, there are other videos that were out there, other patrol videos, patrol car videos that were taken. This is the best, clearest video of all of them that we are making available to the press, just so that you're aware of that. So if I can, let me start with some of the generic facts that have been determined through the investigation of this. This all began on November 15th. As you're aware, about 11:10 at night. On that evening, Parker Archie Moore and his friend Scott Skirdall, both Linfield students, both Linfield football players, went to the 7-Eleven in McMinnville on the corner of Fellows and Highway 99W. Parker was driving the vehicle, parked it in a space that is almost, or is just to the left of the front door of the 7-Eleven, and Parker went into the store to make a purchase. Scott remained in the vehicle, and while there, and I'll show you, I've actually got here, this is a picture of the generic area that we're talking about, just so that everybody is familiar here with that area. Let me get my pointer out. This is Fellows Street. This is 99W or Baker Street. This is the 7-Eleven. This vehicle here, just coincidentally, is in exactly the same spot that Parker parked his vehicle right there. The front door to the 7-Eleven is about here. I'm going to mention a couple of other landmarks as we go along. I'm going to talk about this walkway. At the end of the walkway, which is a little difficult to see, right there is a small, about 2 or 3 step stairway that goes down to the sidewalk along Fellows. Right about this area, just under the cover of the store, is a Redbox kiosk, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. As as Parker was inside of the store and Scott was inside of the vehicle, a Hispanic man who was described later as heavyset with a white t-shirt and jeans came up from this area and was seen by Scott to be around the Redbox. Remember, this is 11:10 at night. Although it's a fairly well-lit area because of the parking lot in the store, he saw him in this area. Scott said to the officers on multiple occasions as he was interviewed that there was something about this man that made him uncomfortable. In fact, he described him as sketchy. That's a quote. Sketchy to the point that Scott reached over and locked the doors on the vehicle. After a short period of time, the man came across and entered the store. You see here, this is Mr. Bermudez-Arenas, and it's a picture of him as he entered the 7-Eleven store. This is the only photograph I'm going to show you of the inside of the store. None of the other video or information from inside the store is going to be given out. Certainly the privacy interests of Mr. Parker about what happened in there override really, I think, any period interests that we might have beyond that. But as you can see here, Mr. Arenas has in his hand a knife. I'm going to show you the knife in a minute. The video from the store shows that as Mr. Bermudez-Arenas walked into the store, he reached down with his left hand, lifted his shirt, and either pulled the knife from his waistband or from his left pocket. It's difficult to determine what he did. He walked directly up to Parker, who was standing at the checkout, ready to make his purchases and leave. And the witnesses described that he came up to him and punched him twice in the chest. It's interesting, and you'll see from my memorandum, the witnesses described the action as Parker getting punched, almost as if somebody was roughhousing or funning with him. And it was only as Mr. Bermudez-Arenas rushed out of the store and Parker stepped back that they realized he'd actually been injured and stabbed. He was stabbed twice in the chest. Mr. Bermudez-Arenas left the store, and when he did, he came out. Remember, as I told you, Scott was in the vehicle, At this point, he headed off in this direction. Another patron in the store immediately began first aid assistance to Parker inside of the store. The store clerk called 911. Had a question, I don't remember from where, earlier about a second call to 911. The store clerk actually triggered the silent alarm in the store, meaning that there had been a robbery or other incident, and the security company also made a call to YCOM, to Yamhill County Communications, made a call to YCOM, a 911 call. Officers were immediately dispatched to the area. As I mentioned to you, I'm going to show you a video in a little bit, but I'd like to kind of go through what happened next. As an aside, through the investigation, it was determined that Mr. Bermudez Arenas came out along this way, and you're going to see this house right here. This is where he lived at the time with other family members. He went to the house, and according to family members who were interviewed by law enforcement, told them that he had done something wrong, he had a problem, or had stabbed someone. There are different things told to the investigators about what happened, and that he was going to go turn himself in. Officers arrived, and I'm going to show you a video from one of the officers' vehicles, which shows them arriving on scene. One of the officers parks, parks right here, just inside the driveway. Another officer parks here. That's Officer Anderson's vehicle, which I'm going to be showing you the video from. Sergeant Sandoval arrives and parks out here, actually about here. And ultimately, Officer James comes from the other direction, parking here. Officers came in, immediately went into the store. Officers Anderson, McMullen, and Sergeant Sandoval went into the store, gave aid to Parker, excuse me, inside, until EMTs arrived. At one point, or after a while, Sergeant James arrives, and he is out in this area. Emergency vehicles come into here. Officer McMullen is at the door speaking with the clerk at one point, lets the EMTs in. They are all inside of the store tending to Parker. Officer McMullen is at the front door and is speaking with the clerk. Officer James approaches. I mentioned that it's important. There were 3 officers involved in this shooting ultimately, Officers James, McMullen, and Sergeant Sandoval. And as James approaches the front door, he operates his body mic, and you're going to hear the conversation from that point on of what occurs. Officer McMullen goes back into the store briefly, and Scott, who had gone from outside in the car and had stepped inside to aid Parker, comes out, as the EMTs are inside, comes out and joins both the clerk and Officer James at the front door. Something causes Officer James to turn slightly to his right. He looks down in this area, and at that point sees a man who is the same as the description given of the person who stabbed Parker. Prior to that in the video, as the officers are standing here, you will see Mr. Bermudez Arenas come to the stairway. You're going to see him step up by the red box. You're going to see him stand there for several seconds without doing or saying anything. Listening, watching as the EMTs enter, listening, watching as the officers are doing their work. At that point then, both the clerk and Scott identify him as the man that they were looking for. Officer James immediately turns towards him, draws his weapon, and begins giving him directives. The directives included get on the ground and the like. Officer McMullen comes out. Both Officer McMullen and Officer James are on the sidewalk. Sergeant Sandoval immediately comes out and comes into a position about here. And all 3 have their weapons drawn on Mr. Bermudez Arenas, and all 3 are giving commands, which you'll be able to hear, that include drop the knife, get on the ground, the type of commands that you would expect. Mr. Bermudez Arenas, and this is really important for you to know because ultimately as you watch the video, and I've had the opportunity to see it many times now as I reviewed the case, Mr. Bermudez Arenas is in a position like this. He has his hands up, both hands are clenched, and he has his hands up like this. In his right hand, which is not visible on the video, is this knife. And you'll note it's not visible because, in fact, it's not a shiny knife like you would normally expect. This is a knife that we think is the same knife you saw in the store that he had in his hand. And he has this clenched in his right hand. And it is not like this, it's not down like this, it's pointed directly towards the officers. Mr. Bermudez-Arenas, while the commands are being given, says nothing, does nothing, other than as he's holding his arms like this, he moves them, appears agitated, you'll see that. He jerks them forward once, he jerks them forward twice. Again, the commands are continuing. You'll see the officers begin to advance on him. And the third time, as he jerks them, he steps forward towards Officers James and McMullins with the knife such that they can see it. We can't in the video. And that's when he's shot by the officers. All three officers fired. The part that you can't see from the video is exactly where Sergeant Sandoval is, but you can see where the other two officers are. Had this question, I'll tell you there were 15 shots fired total. Officer James fired 11. Officer McMullen and Sergeant Sandoval each fired twice. It's difficult to say why so many and so few. The officers fired until the threat was stopped, which they are trained to do. Mr. Bermudez falls forward. You can't see it on the video, but he then rolls to his side as the officers are continuing, and then once he comes to a stop, the firing stops. All three officers then move in to one, clear the knife that is still right next to him. He has searched for other weapons and checked, and then they begin to give first aid. You'll see within very few seconds they go inside and bring out, once it's cleared, bring out EMTs to aid him. Video goes a little bit longer after that, just so you can see what happens, and then at that point it ends.